There was a city in ancient America that was larger than medieval London. More than 120 massive earthen pyramids rose from the Mississippi floodplain, and at its peak, over 20,000 people lived there. But here's what nobody expected. For centuries, historians refused to believe that indigenous peoples could have built something this advanced. They created elaborate myths about Welsh explorers and lost civilizations, anything to avoid giving credit where it was due. Then scientists started analyzing DNA from the bones buried beneath these mounds. What they found changed everything we thought we knew about North America's greatest ancient city. The bones revealed that Cahokia wasn't built by one local tribe, slowly growing over time. Instead, the genetic evidence showed something far more remarkable. This was a city forged by waves of migrants arriving from distant corners of the continent, each bringing their own knowledge and traditions. The DNA told a story that contradicted centuries of assumptions. But before we get to those shocking genetic revelations, you need to understand just how massive and sophisticated this city really was, because what these ancient builders accomplished with nothing but stone tools and woven baskets seems almost impossible, even by today's standards. The centerpiece of Cahokia is called Monk's Mound, and its scale is staggering. Picture a structure 100 feet tall, covering more than 14 acres. Workers moved over 22 million cubic feet of soil to build it, carrying every single basket of earth by hand. The base is actually longer than the Great Pyramid of Giza. At the summit stood a massive wooden structure, likely the home or temple of Cahokia's supreme leader. But Monk's Mound was just the beginning. Surrounding it, city planners laid out an 80-acre central plaza, larger than 60 football fields. Dozens of smaller mounds ringed this space, each serving a specific purpose. Some held buildings, others served as burial sites or ceremonial centers. Archaeologists have identified at least 120 distinct mounds, each built in stages over decades. The city's design shows a level of organization rarely seen in pre-Columbian North America. Straight avenues connected neighborhoods and ceremonial zones. A massive wooden palisade enclosed the central precinct, separating elite spaces from common areas. At the western edge, something truly remarkable stood. A circle of wooden posts over 20 feet tall, precisely placed to mark the solstices and equinoxes. This solar calendar required astronomical knowledge that would rival ancient observatories anywhere in the world. The posts guided planting seasons, harvests, and sacred rituals, aligning the city's rhythms with the movements of the sun. The engineering precision needed for all of this is mind-boggling. But what you're about to learn is that the people who built this weren't who anyone expected them to be. In the 19th century, writers and self-proclaimed experts looked at Cahokia's mounds and simply couldn't accept the truth. They invented wild stories to explain who built them, and these myths spread like wildfire. One popular legend claimed that Welsh explorers, led by Prince Madoc, crossed the Atlantic in the 12th century and constructed the mounds long before Columbus. Others insisted that a mysterious lost civilization once flourished here, only to be wiped out by later Native American groups. These theories appeared in books, lectures, and even official maps. But here's the disturbing part. These myths weren't just bad archaeology. They were used to justify displacing native peoples by claiming they were merely inheritors of someone else's legacy. Then, in the 1960s, archaeologist Melvin Fowler brought real science to Cahokia. His team unearthed continuous evidence of occupation, construction techniques, and artifacts that matched the traditions of known indigenous groups. The pottery styles, stone tools, and neighborhood layouts pointed directly to the ancestors of modern native communities. The myth started crumbling further when excavators found household debris scattered in the mound fill, broken pots, animal bones, corn cobs, all the everyday refuse of a living city. Radiocarbon dating placed Cahokia's peak between 1050 and 1200 CE, centuries before any European contact. The people who built Monk's Mound were unmistakably indigenous to the Mississippi Valley. But even with the myths debunked, the biggest mystery remained unsolved. Where exactly did all these builders come from? And what secrets were hidden in their bones? Mound 72 sits just southeast of Monk's Mound, and what archaeologists found buried there exposed the brutal reality of Cahokia's society. More than 270 burials were layered over decades, but two discoveries revealed just how divided this city really was. The most lavish grave held a man between 40 and 50 years old, laid out on a bed of over 20,000 marine shell beads arranged in the shape of a bird with outstretched wings. Dozens of finely crafted arrowheads clustered at his side. His bones tell their own story. He stood taller than most people, His teeth and bones showed he ate a diet rich in maize and protein. Chemical traces in his teeth proved he spent his childhood far from Cahokia, likely in the southeast, before rising to power here. His burial goods, shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from distant mines, revealed connections stretching hundreds of miles. This was clearly a man of immense power and prestige. But nearby, a very different burial revealed the dark side of that power. In a single pit, the remains of 53 young women, most between 18 and 23 years old, were arranged in rows. Their bodies showed little sign of violence, but the uniformity of their ages and the timing of their deaths pointed to one horrifying conclusion: mass sacrifice. These women were not buried with wealth or ceremony. Their grave goods were sparse, and their bodies showed they were common residents, not elites. The contrast couldn't be more stark. What kind of society creates such extreme inequality, and what does it say about who held power in this ancient city? Physical anthropologist Kristen Hedman spent years studying these remains, and what she found exposes the brutal social order of Cahokia. The differences between elite and sacrificial burials are impossible to ignore. The birdman's robust health and unique grave goods stand in stark contrast to the simplicity of the women's interment, but the mass grave is significant for another reason. Its scale and placement within the mound suggest these women's deaths were part of a larger ritual, possibly to accompany the passing of a leader or to renew the community's spiritual order. Similar practices have been documented in other Mississippian societies, where the deaths of retainers or captives reinforce the power and sanctity of the elite. Other burials in Mound 72 include pairs of men and women laid side by side, children bundled with adults, and individuals whose bodies show signs of trauma or unusual treatment. The diversity of burial practices, the distribution of grave goods, and the physical differences between the dead all point to a society sharply divided by status, role, and possibly even origin. In this sacred ground, the bones recorded a story of hierarchy and ritual, but they were about to reveal something even more surprising. Because when scientists finally extracted DNA from these ancient remains, they discovered that Cahokia's population wasn't what anyone expected. The genetic evidence was about to overturn everything historians thought they knew about who actually built this city and where they came from. Inside a sterile laboratory, Dr. Jane Sorensen leans over ancient teeth and bone samples. The tools are designed to keep modern DNA out, preserving the faint genetic traces left by people who lived 1,000 years ago. Each sample is logged, scanned, and prepared for mitochondrial DNA analysis, a method that targets the maternal line and survives longest in ancient remains. When these genetic sequences were compared to regional databases, the results defied every old assumption. This wasn't a single local population. The data revealed a city absolutely teeming with newcomers. In one study, strontium isotope analysis of 87 teeth from Cahokia burials showed that 87% of individuals grew up somewhere else. Let that sink in. Nearly 9 out of 10 people buried at Cahokia were migrants. The chemical signature in their tooth enamel, fixed in childhood, pointed to origins as far-flung as the Great Lakes, the northern plains, and the Gulf Coast. Some individuals carried the geologic stamp of copper-rich terrains in Michigan. Others matched the shell-rich soils of Florida or Louisiana. This diversity wasn't just statistical. It was written into the genetic code. Haplogroup mapping, a way of tracing maternal ancestry, uncovered a patchwork of lineages rarely seen in one place. Teeth from elite burials, common graves, and mass interments all showed a spectrum of haplogroups typical of Native American populations, but with enough variety to suggest a city built on migration and mixing. The archaeological record echoed this genetic story. Copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf, and pottery styles from distant river valleys all converged in Cahokia's heart. But this discovery raised an even bigger question. Why were so many people migrating to this one city? Dr. Sorensen's team used ultra-clean techniques to ensure every result was genuine. Each sequence was checked and rechecked, cross-referenced with artifacts and burial contexts. The evidence supported what the city's scale already suggested. Cahokia was a true melting pot, a magnet for migrants during the centuries of its greatest growth. The implications are staggering. This city's population wasn't the product of slow local expansion, but of waves of newcomers, each adding to the city's complexity. Some may have been drawn by opportunity, others by alliance or coercion. The genetic diversity found in the mounds and cemeteries mirrors the cultural diversity seen in Cahokia's neighborhoods, plazas, and sacred spaces. This wasn't an isolated settlement. It was a continental crossroads, shaped by the movement of people and ideas across the ancient Midwest and beyond. The science of ancient DNA had rewritten the story of who lived and died at Cahokia. It revealed a city defined by migration, adaptation, and the constant arrival of strangers. But here's what nobody talks about. All that diversity. All those different groups arriving from hundreds of miles away. All competing for resources in one crowded city. That kind of pressure doesn't just disappear. And by the late 1200s, something went terribly wrong. The cracks that would eventually destroy Cahokia were starting to spread through its foundations. By the late 1200s, disaster struck from multiple directions at once. Tree ring records point to a mega drought gripping the region between 1276 and 1299, the worst in centuries. Crops withered in the fields, and the once reliable Mississippi floods turned unpredictable. But the threats weren't only environmental. Archaeologists have traced burn layers and hastily rebuilt palisades to around 1170, showing that conflict was escalating. Defensive walls rose and fell in quick succession, evidence of rising violence, either from within or from hostile neighbors pressing in. Human remains from these years bear silent witness to the suffering. Skeletons show signs of malnutrition and physical stress. Some skulls carry the lesions of tuberculosis, a disease that flourished as populations grew denser and resources ran thin. The city's diversity, once its greatest strength, became a challenge as newcomers and locals competed for shrinking resources. Rituals and sacrifices grew more frequent, perhaps in desperate search of stability. As drought, disease, and unrest converged, the city that had drawn people from across the continent became a pressure cooker. Its population stretched to the breaking limit. The forces that fueled Cahokia's meteoric rise now drove it toward collapse. But what happened to all those people when the city finally fell? The answer to that question challenges everything we've been told about Cahokia's disappearance. Traces of Cahokia's people linger in the land and water long after the city's last fires burned out. Deep in lakebed sediments, scientists detected fecal stanals, chemical fingerprints left by human waste, that continue without interruption into the 1500s and 1600s. This evidence, drawn from Horseshoe Lake near the mounds, confirms that Native Americans remained in the region for centuries after Cahokia's collapse. The story of disappearance loses ground as science reveals a steady, if shifting, presence. Oral traditions among the Illinois Confederation describe ancestors who built great earthworks and farmed these fields, echoing the archaeological record. Chief Ayasha Redbird, speaking at a recent gathering, reminds listeners that the descendants of Cahokia's builders are still here, their heritage written in both memory and soil. The next frontier lies in full genome sequencing, a project underway with the consent of tribal communities. Researchers hope these studies will soon clarify connections between ancient Cahokia and modern indigenous groups, restoring a sense of continuity too long denied by myth and silence. For centuries, the story of Cahokia was stolen and rewritten by people who refused to acknowledge indigenous achievement. The myths of Welsh explorers and lost civilizations served a purpose: to erase native accomplishment and justify displacement. But DNA doesn't lie, and the bones tell a story that can't be twisted or denied. Today, DNA research proves Cahokia was a thriving multi-ethnic metropolis, an indigenous achievement erased from most textbooks. The genetic evidence shows 87% of its population were migrants who came from across the continent, drawn to a city that became North America's first true urban center. These weren't mysterious outsiders or foreign explorers. They were Native Americans from the Great Lakes, the Gulf Coast, and the Northern Plains, all converging on one remarkable place. The city they built rivaled medieval London in size and surpassed many ancient civilizations in engineering sophistication. They moved 22 million cubic feet of earth without metal tools or wheeled vehicles. They aligned massive wooden monuments to track the movements of the sun with precision that required advanced astronomical knowledge. They organized a workforce of thousands across generations to build structures that still stand today. The bones buried beneath the mounds reveal both the glory and the darkness of Cahokia. Elite burials dripping with wealth and prestige, mass graves of sacrificed young women, signs of hierarchy, ritual, power, and ultimately the pressures that tore the city apart. But they also reveal continuity. The descendants of Cahokia's builders never disappeared. They're still here, carrying memories and heritage that modern science is only now beginning to confirm. As new techniques unlock more stories from ancient bones, we're forced to rethink who built America's first cities and who still claims that legacy. History isn't just what we inherit, it's what we choose to see. The truth about Cahokia was always there, written in the earth and bone, waiting for science to catch up with what indigenous peoples already knew.